I've watched good people become monsters, not gradually, not over years, in less than a week. I've seen college students screened for psychological stability, chosen for their normalcy transform into sadistic guards and broken prisoners. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. We shut it down after 6 days. Why? Because power didn't just influence behavior. It rewired identity. It consumed humanity. And here is what haunts me most. It didn't require evil people. It required only one thing: a uniform, a role, and permission. What I discovered in that basement changed everything I believed about human nature. And it should terrify you. I've spent 5 decades studying the psychology of evil. My laboratory has been prisons, military installations, courtrooms, and makeshift dungeons beneath university buildings. I've interviewed torturers, analyzed genocides, and testified as an expert witness in abuse trials. My research has been cited in over 10,000 academic papers, challenged in congressional hearings, and condemned by ethics boards worldwide. Some call my work groundbreaking. Others call it unethical. Both are probably right. But here is what nobody disputes. I've seen firsthand what happens when ordinary people are given extraordinary power over others. I've documented the transformation. I've measured it. I've watched it destroy lives, including my own moral certainty. And I am going to share with you the most uncomfortable truth psychology has ever discovered. In the summer of 1971, I created a prison in the basement of Stanford University's psychology department. Not a simulation, a prison. We advertised in newspapers for volunteers, male college students willing to participate in a study on prison life. 75 responded. We screened them extensively. Psychiatric interviews, personality tests, background checks. We eliminated anyone with criminal records, psychological disorders, or health problems. What remained were 24 of the most average, middle-class, emotionally stable young men we could find. Students, sons, future professionals. I randomly assigned them roles with a coin flip. Guards or prisoners, nothing more. We arrested the prisoners at their homes without warning. Real police cars, real handcuffs. Actual booking procedures at a real station. We stripped them, deloused them, gave them numbered smocks and ankle chains. No names, only numbers. The guards received khaki uniforms, wooden batons, whistles, and mirrored sunglasses to prevent eye contact. I gave them one instruction: maintain order, no physical violence, but otherwise do whatever necessary to control the prisoners. I told them they were creating an atmosphere of powerlessness. What I didn't tell them was how easily they would embrace that mission, how quickly the costume would become identity, how completely the role would consume the person. Within hours, not days, the guards began asserting authority in creative ways. Push-ups for minor infractions, bathroom privileges revoked. Prisoners forced to clean toilet bowls with their bare hands. By the second day, the prisoners rebelled. They barricaded themselves in their cells using their beds. And that is when everything accelerated. The guards didn't report the rebellion to me for help. They crushed it themselves, using fire extinguishers to force prisoners away from the doors, stripping them naked, putting the ringleaders in solitary confinement, a closet we called the hole. On the morning of day 2, I arrived to find prisoners with bags over their heads, guards working extra shifts voluntarily, and an atmosphere that felt genuinely dangerous. One guard, who I later called John Wayne for his theatrical cruelty, had worked 16 hours straight. Not because I asked him, because he wanted to. He invented new humiliations, forcing prisoners to simulate sodomy with each other, making them sing songs, while doing jumping jacks, creating arbitrary rules just to punish their violation. I watched through observation windows. I took notes. And here is the thing that still makes me sick. I didn't stop it. Not because of scientific rigor, because I wasn't a psychologist anymore. I was the prison superintendent. My role had consumed me too. When parents came to visit their sons on visiting day, I worried about my prison looking legitimate. I worried about maintaining control. When my graduate student, the woman I would later marry, came into the basement and saw prisoners with bags on their heads chained together, being forced to chant obscenities, she looked at me with horror and asked, "What are you doing to those boys?" I didn't see boys, I saw prisoners. I saw a prison that needed managing. It took an outsider, someone not immersed in the role, to make me see what I'd become. But by then, the damage was done and the transformation was complete. Prisoner 416, who arrived late to the study, refused to participate in the guards' games. He went on a hunger strike. The guards' response, they didn't report his non-compliance to me. They punished the other prisoners for his defiance, creating social pressure to force his compliance. They put him in solitary confinement for hours. When that didn't work, they gave other prisoners a choice: give up their blankets or leave 416 in the hole overnight. The prisoners chose to keep their blankets. Solidarity collapsed in less than a week. Prisoner 8612 began to show signs of severe distress on day 2, acute emotional disturbance, crying rage, disorganized thinking. We released him after just 36 hours. Another prisoner developed a psychosomatic rash covering his entire body. We released him too. By day 5, parents were hiring attorneys. Guards were volunteering for extra shifts to maintain discipline. And I was planning how to counter a rumored escape attempt, worrying not about the welfare of suffering students, but about the security of my prison. We terminated the experiment on day 6. Not because of the prisoners suffering, though that should have been enough, because Christina Maslach, that graduate student I mentioned, told me I had a moral obligation to stop. She saw what I couldn't, that we'd all become our roles so completely that we'd lost perspective on reality. Here is what that basement taught me. Power doesn't corrupt, it reveals and amplifies. But more than that, it transforms identity at a fundamental level. The guards didn't think, I am a college student pretending to be a guard. They thought, I am a guard. These are my prisoners. This is my institution. The uniform wasn't a costume. It was permission. Permission to shed the normal constraints of empathy, fairness, and human decency. We call this process deindividuation, the loss of individual identity and accountability when subsumed into a role or group. The mirrored sunglasses weren't just props. They were barriers to human connection. When the guards couldn't see their own eyes, they couldn't see their own humanity reflected back. When prisoners couldn't see the guards' eyes, they couldn't appeal to empathy. The system stripped everyone of personhood simultaneously. But there is a deeper mechanism, situational power. We vastly underestimate the influence of situations and vastly overestimate the influence of personal character. We believe we'd be the good guard, the rebellious prisoner, the whistleblower who speaks up. We're wrong. Research across decades, obedience studies, conformity experiments, field observations shows the same pattern. Normal people commit abnormal acts when placed in abnormal situations with role legitimacy and diffused responsibility. The guards escalated because there were no consequences, only rewards, peer approval from other guards, my tacit acceptance as superintendent, and the intrinsic satisfaction of exercising control. Power became its own justification. They weren't following orders, they were improvising cruelty creatively. That is what makes it so disturbing. The sadism wasn't commanded, it was invented. The situation didn't just permit abuse, it cultivated innovation in abuse. I need to tell you something I don't often admit. I failed those young men. Every one of them. The guards who became brutal weren't evil people. They were sons, brothers, students with futures. One guard later told me he was just playing the role he thought I wanted. Another said he didn't realize how far it had gone until it was over. The horror in their voices when they watched the footage later that was real. They hadn't recognized themselves in the moment. The role had eclipsed the person, but the prisoners suffered more. Prisoner 8612, the one we released after 36 hours, later described feeling genuinely imprisoned, not intellectually understanding it was an experiment, but viscerally experiencing captivity. His breakdown wasn't performance, it was real psychological trauma. Years later, participants reported lasting impacts, nightmares, difficulties with authority, trust issues. We gave them $50 in psychological scars that wouldn't heal. And myself, I became someone I didn't recognize. I prioritized experimental continuity over human welfare. I saw suffering and took notes instead of intervening. When my research assistants expressed concerns, I dismissed them as threats to the study's integrity. The superintendent role consumed the psychologist, the ethicist, the human being. I tell students now, the most dangerous thing about that study wasn't what it revealed about the guards. It was what it revealed about me. Christina Maslach saved those men. She had no official authority, no role in the prison hierarchy. She simply walked in, saw human suffering, and refused to pretend it was acceptable. That is the power of an outsider, someone not immersed in the situational forces, not committed to the roles, not invested in the system's continuation. We needed her moral clarity because ours had been completely compromised. Now, let me connect this to your life. You are not planning to be a prison guard, but you exercise power every single day. Parent to child, manager to employee, teacher to student, partner to partner. And in every one of those relationships, the same mechanisms operate. When you have authority over someone, when you can grant or deny privileges, approve or reject choices, reward or punish behavior, you enter a psychological space that changes you. Not might changes you. The question isn't whether power affects your behavior. The question is whether you are aware enough to recognize it and disciplined enough to resist it. I see this in relationships constantly. One partner controls finances. Suddenly every purchase becomes a permission negotiation. One parent becomes the disciplinarian. Suddenly punishments escalate beyond what is necessary, justified as maintaining order. A new manager wants to establish authority. Suddenly minor infractions receive disproportionate responses, not because they're serious, but because the manager needs to demonstrate power. The deindividuation happens here too. You stop seeing the full person, your child, your employee, your partner, and start seeing the role. My subordinate, my kid. Not a human being with equal intrinsic worth, but a role player in your personal hierarchy. And once that shift happens, empathy doesn't just decrease, it fundamentally changes character. You empathize with their role compliance, not their human experience. Here is the test. Do you ever justify your behavior by your position? I am the parent, so I am the boss. So I am paying the bills. So every time you invoke your role to justify an action, you are letting the uniform do the thinking. You are not exercising judgment, you are exercising power. And power unexamined always expands to fill the space available. This isn't theoretical. This is Abu Ghraib. This is every police brutality case where good cops stand by while a colleague kneels on someone's neck for 9 minutes. This is corporate hierarchies where executives rationalize exploiting workers because that is business. This is every authoritarian regime in history that turned ordinary citizens into genocide participants. The soldiers at Abu Ghraib weren't specially selected for cruelty. They were normal American kids, clerks, mechanics, administrative personnel given guard duty. They weren't trained for, in a prison with no oversight, told to soften up detainees for interrogation. What did they do? They recreated the Stanford Prison Experiment with real prisoners and real torture. Sexual humiliation, forced nudity, stress positions, dogs. They took photographs, they smiled for the camera. Not because they were monsters, but because the situation made monstrous behavior normal, acceptable, even entertaining. The banality of evil Hannah Arendt's phrase about Adolf Eichmann captures this perfectly. Evil doesn't require evil people. It requires normal people in roles that permit, encourage, or reward harmful behavior. Add anonymity, diffuse responsibility, and authority legitimacy, and you create a perfect storm for atrocity. In everyday life, this shows up in subtler ways. The hiring manager who discriminates because cultural fit provides cover. The doctor who dismisses patient pain because medical authority makes their judgment unquestionable. The parent who uses corporal punishment not because it is effective, but because power makes it possible, and tradition makes it acceptable. Every instance follows the same pattern, role-based permission replacing ethical reasoning. The scariest part, most people engaged in these behaviors believe they're good people. They compartmentalize. I am a good person who sometimes has to do hard things because of my role. The role becomes the moral excuse. The uniform becomes the ethical shield. I need to be honest with you about something. My research has been heavily criticized, and much of that criticism is valid. Ethics boards today would never approve the prison study, never. We caused genuine psychological harm without proper consent or safeguards. We didn't adequately debrief participants. We prioritized data over dignity. Some critics argue the guards acted cruelly because they thought I wanted them to demand characteristics in psychology. They're partially right. I created a system that signaled what behavior was acceptable, but that doesn't invalidate the findings. It reinforces them. Real prisons have the same signals. Real hierarchies communicate expectations. The criticism proves the point. Systems shape behavior, whether designed by psychologists or societies. Others say the study can't generalize because it was artificial. But Abu Ghraib wasn't artificial. The Milgram obedience studies weren't artificial. The Rwandan genocide wasn't artificial. The pattern repeats across cultures, contexts, and centuries. Give people power, remove accountability, provide role legitimacy, and a predictable percentage will abuse that power. Not everyone, but enough. Always enough. Here is my self-reflection. After 50 years, I wish I'd stopped it sooner. I wish I'd protected those young men better. I wish I'd been the outsider voice instead of needing Christina to be that voice. But I also believe the findings matter. They're uncomfortable. They challenge our fundamental beliefs about human nature and personal character, but discomfort doesn't make them false. The question I ask myself, and the question you should ask yourself, is this: what situations am I in right now where role has eclipsed ethics? Where am I exercising power without sufficient self-examination? Where have I become so identified with my authority that I've stopped seeing the full humanity of those under that authority? Because I guarantee you, if I could lose myself in a role I consciously designed as an experiment, you can lose yourself in roles you inhabit every single day without even recognizing it is happening. Here is what 5 decades of studying power has taught me. You are not immune. Your good intentions are not sufficient protection. Your self-image as a moral person will not prevent you from doing immoral things when the situation provides permission and the role provides justification. Power changes everyone because power operates beneath conscious awareness. You don't decide to dehumanize someone. It happens gradually as your role reinforces certain behaviors and punishes others. You don't choose to escalate control. The situation creates momentum, and without active resistance, you follow that momentum wherever it leads. The only defense is awareness and accountability. You need people in your life who will be your Christina Maslach, who will walk into your metaphorical basement and ask, "What are you doing?" You need to consciously cultivate perspective taking, especially with people over whom you have power. You need to regularly ask, "Am I justifying this action by my role rather than by its ethical merit?" And you need to accept an uncomfortable truth. The line between good and evil isn't fixed. It is not a boundary between people. It is a permeable membrane within each person. And which side you land on depends less on your character than on your circumstances. Understanding that doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It is the foundation for preventing it. The guards in my study weren't evil. They were empowered. And empowerment without ethical constraint is the most dangerous force in human psychology. Whether you are wielding power in a prison, a corporation, a family, or a relationship, the dynamics are the same. The transformation is always waiting. The question is whether you are vigilant enough to recognize it and strong enough to resist it. So here is my question for you. Where do you have power over others right now? Not dramatic institutional power, everyday power. Who needs your approval, your permission, your authorization? Your children, your employees, your students, your partner? Now ask yourself, have you ever justified your behavior by invoking that power? Have you ever made a decision based on because I said so rather than ethical reasoning? Have you noticed yourself becoming less patient, less empathetic, more rigid in those relationships where you hold authority? If the answer is yes, and if you are honest, the answer is yes, then you've experienced the same transformation I documented in that basement. The only difference is scale and awareness. The question isn't whether you have the capacity for abuse. The question is what you are going to do about it. Leave a comment. What is one way you could check your power in a relationship right now?